Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries, and this video is a quickfire video response to Heyman Opie's video, How Do You Handle Empty Rooms? And in it, he asks the interesting question of, as a GM, how do you handle portraying an empty room to the players? Do you simply tell them it's an empty room and get them to move on? Do you let them find it out for themselves? How exactly do you handle it? Well, personally, I'm not a massive fan of dungeon crawls. The way I tend to handle it, though, is I tend to try not to think of a room as empty. Now, Heyman Opie makes the very salient point to that not all rooms would have a person in it, and that's absolutely correct. Not all rooms in a house, dungeon, ruin, whatever, would have a person, a creature, a monster in them. However, that does not necessarily mean that they are empty in terms of an interesting encounter. Very few buildings are built with the idea that some rooms will just be left entirely featureless and devoid of anything in them. After all, why would you bother building a room like that? If you look at your own house, you probably don't have a room that is entirely empty with nothing in it. It may just have furniture in it, it may just be storage, but there's always something in it. So what I tend to do is, for rooms where players are going to be exploring them, I try and just put a couple of little details in, even if it's just mentioning that there's the wreckage of an old bookcase in there and dropping a few hints about various half-destroyed texts that they find. And this is a great way to include clues for further adventures. Perhaps there's part of an old diary on the ruined bookcase that crumbles to dust, allowing them only to read a few small fragments that foreshadows a future adventure. Who knows, perhaps there's the remnants of a rusted old suit of armor which portrays the nature of the creatures that once used to dwell in the ruin. Whatever you put in there, just make it something interesting or that seems appropriate. Let the players have a look at it, give them a bit of description. It all adds some extra interests to your setting, and it makes the room feel as though it's not just an empty room that's been tacked onto the side of the dungeon for no good reason. If for some reason you really do want to include a lot of empty rooms, like for instance, maybe the players are exploring a naturally formed cavern system where there might feasibly be a lot of empty caves that are just rocky spaces underground or wherever the caverns happen to be set, what I'd rather do is I'd much rather myself gloss over those areas until you get to somewhere interesting. So for instance, I'd be quite happy as the players entered this cavern system saying, after trekking miles and miles through treacherous expanses of caverns and small crawl holes and tunnels, often having to double back on yourselves and make markings on the walls to prevent yourselves from getting lost, you stumble into a larger cavern. You can hear the sounds of heavy breathing from the tunnel just ahead of you, and then lead into the actual interesting encounter bits. So that's how I'd recommend doing empty rooms. If you can get away without having them be empty and you can fold some interesting details into them, do so, especially if it's a building that's been purposefully made, since it's very rare a building will be made with a room that's going to stay entirely empty. If you do have occasion to have a lot of locations which are entirely devoid of interest or features, then I would suggest just glossing over them and treating them as part of the journey montage traveling through the dungeon, allowing you to pick out a few salient details about the journey, i.e. that the caverns are treacherous, that they've had to double back, they've had to make markings, etc. All things that experienced adventurers would probably know how to do. And it allows you to focus on the really interesting encounters. So that's my video response and my advice on how I'd handle empty rooms. I hope if you like this video, you'll consider clicking on like and subscribing by clicking on the red dice up in that corner. If you have any comments, as always, hit me up in the Google Plus links below. And until I see you next time, thank you very much for watching and listening. Take care.